Well, good morning, everybody. How are you this wonderful end of May Sunday? Okay, I'll take it. We're starting a brand new series called One Another. For those of you who may not have had the chance to meet me or I meet you, my name's Jason. I'm one of the pastors here. I love preaching from God's Word and sharing with you just things that I'm learning, things that He wants us to learn, and just things that I hope will inspire us. We exist here as a church for one simple reason: to love and live like Jesus. And everything that we do, every time we preach, every time we teach, every time we sing, we want to be Christ-centric, Christ-focused. And so this series is all steeped in that hope and that desire. We want to live like Jesus and love like Jesus to the best of our ability with whatever time, whatever talent, whatever opportunities He brings before us. And that's the big why of why we're digging into this next series. One Another is it's a language of community. It's a language of opportunity. It's a language of relationship. And you probably know just as much as I do that sometimes our one anothering is a bit challenging. How many of you are gearing up for some sort of extended family connection time or family reunion this summer? Anybody? How many of you are hoping to avoid an extended family connection or family reunion this summer? Sometimes the families that we have are the most challenging, relationally oriented environments that we can be in. They maybe don't agree with us in what we think or with what we do. I can remember some of the times, and I want you to help me out with this, some of the times that I've been in an extended family gathering, there have been these habits that creep up in these individuals that I'm supposed to be related to that really annoy me. You know what I'm talking about, yeah? You're at that extended family dinner and somebody's the loud chewer. Yeah? You ever been around that? Somebody's like looking at the person beside them going like, that's you. You are that chewer. There's that annoying thing. I actually had an uncle all the time that just thought it would be hilarious if he'd walk up behind you and you were engaged in either a game, conversation, standing in line for food, whatever, and he'd pinch the back of your arms. Yeah? Have you ever done that before? Go ahead and pinch your own arm. It doesn't feel pleasant. It's annoying. It's frustrating. It may be borderline enraging. How many of you go to that extended family gathering, that time, the family reunion, and you have that one relative you are trying to avoid because you do not want to hear the same set of stories for the 41st time, yes? Okay, you all understand that there are some annoying things that all of us do as human beings to one another. I'm actually going to talk about some of those today, but I'm really going to focus on two things that we do to one another that actually destroy community. Like some of the annoying things that happen, they don't actually erode the community around us. They don't erode the relationship. That uncle or that individual that's telling you the story for the 41st time, they're not actually harming you in any way other than maybe an assault on your ears. They're not speaking ill maybe of yourself or somebody else, but it's annoying. And so there's a difference between things that are annoying and things that are actually detrimental to community. And as we start off this One Another series, we're going to focus today on some of those things that are actually detrimental to community. In the subsequent weeks, we're going to focus on things that are helpful in our relationships, but we thought it would be great to start at the beginning and look at things that we shouldn't do to one another. I'm going to focus on two things. I'm going to be in two sections of Scripture. So if you do have a Bible, I want to invite you to first turn with me to the book of Galatians, the 5th chapter. I'm going to be highlighting a couple of verses from this text. And then if you want to put your thumb in there and then your finger into James chapter 5, we're going to be looking at verses 7 through 9 as well. YouVersion Bible app is my favorite Bible reading app. It's always available online to look at, and we have a C Road Live opportunity and event that you can connect with all the time to follow along with what we're doing. We're going to have it on the screens. If you don't have a paper Bible, we would love to gift one to you today. Come find me or one of our staff team or volunteers after the service so that we can get that for you. I'm going to first read Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. And then I'm going to thumb over to James chapter 5. 13 through 15, it says this: "For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters. But don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. For the whole law can be summed up by this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you are always biting and devouring one another, watch out. Beware of destroying one another." All right, flip with me to James chapter 5. Verses 7 through 9. It says this: "Dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. Consider the farmers who patiently wait for the rains in the fall and in the spring. They eagerly look for the valuable harvest to ripen. You too must be patient and take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. Don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. For look, the judge is standing at the door." All right, I mentioned a couple of things that we're going to talk about that we shouldn't be doing with one another. The first one is what I'm going to call necrotizing fasciitis. Does anybody know what necrotizing fasciitis actually is? Flesh-eating disease. The first time I was made aware of flesh-eating disease, I remember being in history class in elementary school, and there was some Canadian political leader that was suffering from this disease. If you don't know how this disease functions, your body starts to digest itself, starts to eat itself. It's like worse than an infection. It can be definitely life-threatening. So if your body does not respond to medicine, what ends up happening is, in order to save your life, you have to cut off that part of your anatomy that is infected with this necrotizing fasciitis, because it will not stop otherwise. If it's not responding to medicine, you got to cut it off, cut it out. Necrotizing fasciitis. There's these two chunks of scripture. One was written by the Apostle Paul. One was written by James, the brother of Jesus. And they both talk about this idea of necrotizing fasciitis. Here's some other words that maybe are synonyms that'll help kind of connect the dots for you. Necrotizing fasciitis in a Christ-like community or a group of people is people who complain and grumble about one another. People who gossip about one another. People who tell lies about one another. People who tell half-truths, which are also lies, about one another. Necrotizing fasciitis. What we're getting told here by both Paul and James is, watch out. If that's happening in your community, you will begin to devour yourself. If you want to end a relationship, start complaining about that relationship. Because language creates culture. Here's what I mean by saying this. Language creates culture. The way that you talk about, let's say if you are married, your marriage contributes to the health and well-being of that marriage. I love that Bonnie and I made a pact over 20 years ago that when we'd be in public away from one another, we committed that we would not speak ill of one another in those spaces. If there's something ill that Bonnie needs to speak to me about, she's got two places she can go: to Jesus and right to me. And a lot of times, it's a long conversation. And so what's been wonderful over the last 20 years of our marriage is knowing that when she's out with her friends, her family, people that she's met for the first time, I am not a topic of conversation in a negative fashion. That's breathed life into the culture of our marriage. It's breathed life into the culture of our marriage, because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that even when my wife doesn't love me in the moment, because I didn't put the dishes away, or because I said something that maybe I shouldn't have said, or I forgot to say something that I should have said, or whatever it might have been, instead of grumbling and complaining about me to somebody else, she's patient with me. She's kind. She's gracious. Now, there may be a time in our marriage or our relationship where she needs to go to somebody else. Like if I'm inflicting harm and pain on her emotionally, physically, sexually, then yes, she needs to go to the proper outlets in order to get help. But most often, the things that annoy us about one another should be spoken to one another. That's what happens in a marriage relationship. It happens in a friendship all the time as well. All you got to do is go back to high school. Go back to high school, and what do you hear around the lunchroom, around the library, around the hallways? You hear grumbling and complaining about one another. Why? Because that's the thing to do. Can you believe that she is wearing that today? My goodness. Can you believe that he didn't tell her that he liked her? Can you believe that he didn't love her Instagram story? Like, my goodness, he missed that post. All of these different things. We complain about one another. We're on a sports team. Instead of cheering on our teammates, what are we doing? We're complaining about our teammates. Well, if only you would pass the ball. I went to watch my son's middle school basketball, and my goodness, I was like, where am I? Are you on the same team? Or are we just going to throw down in the middle of the court as teammates? Instead of yelling at one another, instead of complaining about one another, what could it look like to work together? Language creates culture. The way we speak about things matters. The way you speak about your job matters. If you're always complaining about your boss, your coworkers, the environment that you're in, do you think it's going to be exceptionally fun to go to work the next day? No. Why is that? Because you've created a culture internally in yourself where you're only ever focused on what is missing and not what's present. Necrotizing fasciitis. Here's what happens in a community. Everything that's joy-filled and Christ-like gets eaten away. Contentment, gratitude, patience, peace, all of it disappears. It evaporates because we are devouring one another when we complain, when we gossip, when we slander, when we defame somebody's character. Now, that might seem straightforward, but here's the reality check. More often than not, you and I are eating one another. We're devouring one another by the way that we speak. This can happen in our community. You know, Cineplex is closing here in the Brockville region after an 18-year run. I was frustrated when that happened. You know, one of the first phrases out of my mouth, now what are we going to do for fun? Brockville's got nothing. Instantly, what does that do? It blinds you to what's present. Imagine saying to somebody who grew up their entire life in this environment, oh, this place has absolutely nothing. What do you think it does to them? It devalues them instantaneously. Well, what do you mean it's got nothing? Like, I'm here. I'm something. Instantaneously, that happens. So we can do this with one another. We can do this with the places that we're in. We can do this with our neighbors. If you're only ever talking negatively about your neighbors, guess what? Your mindset towards them will always ever be negative. You won't even be able to see the good things that are possible in that interaction or that connection or that physical proximity in terms of a relationship. We've got to stop necrotizing fasciitis. We've got to stop devouring one another. We literally need to cut off the pieces of us that are giving into the dismantling of community, because those things are not Christ-like. They're not like Jesus. If you're going to call yourself a follower of Christ, we want to emulate his character. We need to reflect his habits, his purposes, his emphases. Jesus, when he had a bone to pick with somebody, guess who he went to? that person. I love the interaction that you can see, and you can read this through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, your pick. You can see Jesus have these conversations with the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. And at times he uses pretty potent, intimidating language. At one point in time, he calls them whitewashed tombs. Whitewashed tombs, meaning that, yeah, you look good on the outside, but inside there's nothing but death. When he said that, he didn't say it to his friends first. He said it straight to them, inviting a conversation. So instead of grumbling and complaining, you know what we do when we have a bone to pick about something or someone? We speak to that person directly. That's the Jesus way. And sometimes what you're going to discover is that you're misinformed in your opinion. Like hypothetically, I might go to my wife Bonnie and say, hey, so, yeah, somebody said that you said that I'm fat. Like, I know I'm rocking my dad bod, but like, come on. I can still fit into my jeans from 10 years ago. And then the reality has to sink in that situation where she talks to me and says, actually, you can't because I've purchased new jeans for you, and they're not 10 years old. Oh, okay, I'm misinformed in that moment. My grumbling and complaining has been misaligned in that space. Conversely, when I have a struggle with somebody, like, say, in our church family, I shouldn't use my platform up here. I shouldn't use my ability to write anonymous letters. When I've got a challenge with somebody, I should go to them directly and say, hey, this is bothering me about you. Or this isn't sitting well with me in the moment. Help me understand why. Now, the challenge is most often we can't handle those types of conversations. We're not ready for them. When somebody talks to us about something that maybe they have misinterpreted or they've heard or misunderstood, right away, instantaneously, we get defensive. We jump from maybe giving the body medicine to cutting off appendages. We're just going to cut you off. We're going to cut you off. We're going to cut you off. We're going to cut you off. Instead of understanding that maybe there's a hope of restoration in that relationship. I literally love and enjoy when people come to me and they say, Jason, here's where I'm struggling with you. Yeah, it's sobering in the moment, but you know what? It speaks to the vitality and the potential of that relationship moving forward. I love when my kids have been bold enough to say, hey, Dad, I think that you're communicating something that's different than what you're intending when you do or when you say this. It's wonderful. I love when our church staff looks at me and says, hey, Jason, here's how I'm interpreting where we're going or what we're about. Is this what you're meaning? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, yeah, I did not intend that whatsoever. And this is where being Canadian can be helpful because we are good at apologizing for things that we don't have to apologize for. And so we need to practice apologizing for the things that we do need to apologize for. When we've stepped outside of the boundaries of what is healthy in terms of an expression in relationship, we have to be willing to apologize for causing wounds. Unintended or intended. Language creates culture. If we're not willing to speak well of one another, I'm not talking about lying. I'm not talking about inventing a narrative that only has daisies and rainbows and unicorns a part of it. I'm talking about being real and authentic with one another. If we're unwilling to do that, then we will keep devouring one another and in no way, shape, or form reflect the character and the nature of Jesus. Necrotizing fasciitis. Next time you have the impulse or the desire to start complaining about someone or something in a negative fashion with no possible solution moving forward, consider the reality that you have shifted from being helpful to being harmful. And instead, stop it. Don't do that to one another. Instead, fight for understanding in that moment. There's a second thing that Paul writes about in Galatians chapter 5 that I want to focus on, another kind of root behavior, root activity that is so anti-Jesus, I don't even know what else to call it. I'm going to be focusing on verses 24 through 26 from Galatians chapter 5, and again, it'll be on screen. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have nailed the passions and desires of their sinful nature to his cross and crucified them there. Since we are living by the Spirit, let us follow the Spirit's leading in every part of our lives. Let us not become conceited or provoke one another or be jealous of one another. If there's a pandemic that's happening in our world right now, that pandemic is envy. That pandemic is envy, fear of missing out, desiring something that somebody else has for yourself. Envy creeps up into my life when I'm on the St. Lawrence River kayaking by the mansions. I see them and I'm like, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if that was mine? There's a difference between envy and admiration. Admiration is the ability to look at somebody, see a character quality inside of them, and go like, ooh, I wish I could emulate that. You're essentially looking for that Christ-like character inside of them and saying like, my goodness, this is how you're personifying Jesus to me. I want that to translate in my ability to reflect that to my relational circle, my environment, my circumstances. I want to be like you. I want to reflect that. That's admiration. Envy wants what that person has for yourself, and you don't care what happens to that person. You just want whatever quote-unquote blessing they might have. This happens all the time in relationships. We can look at another person and say, oh my goodness, they are gifted in this way. I wish I was gifted like them. Do you know what happens in that moment when you allow envy instead of admiration to lead you forward in your relationships? You become ungrateful. You become ungrateful for what you do have. Think about this for a moment. Your life right now, here today, the exact moment, the exact set of circumstances, the exact set of challenges that you're facing might actually be the answer to somebody else's prayers. Do you hear what I'm saying? Somebody somewhere in the world is praying for forward movement, to live in a space that is maybe healing or at least exposed so they know what they're dealing with. All the tensions and the challenges, their answers to the prayers that they're praying for themselves might actually be your very own life. But you can't even see it if you're rooted in envy. And envy is so dangerous because envy not only leads to jealousy, it leads to bitterness. And you cannot build any sort of relational foundation on bitterness. Bitterness is worse than a house of cards. It's a house of ash. Bitterness is a house of ash. There's nothing there anymore. It's lifeless. Bitterness clouds our perspective, clouds our judgment, clouds our thoughts, to the point where we are incapable of seeing anything good or even entertaining the idea that something good is possible. Bitterness kills hope. It eviscerates it. Paul, I love his writing here in Galatians chapter 5, and if you're bored this week, I encourage you to read the entirety of the chapter. Because he's basically saying to this community of individuals that know Jesus or have heard the gospel, he wants us to live this way and refrain from these harmful, detrimental behaviors, because when we engage in those behaviors, our ability to reflect the nature of Jesus is impeded. We can devour one another with our words. We can become ungrateful and live in the absence of joy when all we do is envy one another. And friends, that is not what it means to love and live like Jesus. So here's what I'm going to invite you and us to do this upcoming next week. I'm going to invite you to consider engaging in one of these 3 challenges. You're going to see them on the screen here. And I'm going to give you an activity that you can engage in as well right here and now, and even post this experience as well. There'll be a digital format. But here are 3 challenges, considering all that I've shared with you today from these 2 texts of Scripture, that might be helpful in helping us understand that we should not, we could not, we will not do this to one another. First is this: generate a list of people who have something you envy. Maybe that list is short, maybe it's long. And instead of letting your feelings stay in envy, going like, oh, I wish I just had what they had, pray for them and give thanks to God that they have that. Pray for them and give thanks to God that they have that. Those paddles, when I'm paddling with every stroke on that St. Lawrence River, by those multi-million-dollar mansions, I guess like 20 years ago, they're probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. But in this day and age, multi-million dollars mansions, you know what I do? I find myself going like, oh, Lord, how cool. I don't know if those people know you yet, but if they're on their back deck on a wonderful evening and the bugs aren't too bad and they're looking over the water and there's a big boat coming by and there's birds and there's crickets and there's frogs, in that moment, could you spark something in their heart and their mind, maybe a consideration that you exist and you love them and you've actually painted this whole scene for them so that they could know who you are? Because language creates culture. And when I change the narrative, I don't envy, I become thankful for what I too have. I can roll up on my car that has multiple scratches and cracks and be like, wow, this is a beauty. So that first challenge, generate a list of people. You can do this even right now on your phone. You can generate a list of people you have something to envy, and instead of grumbling and complaining about them, give thanks through prayer. Challenge number 2, generate a list of people to whom you have either grumbled, complained, or gossiped. These are people that maybe you've used to vent to. Yeah, that's a popular phrase. Well, I'm just venting. You're complaining. Right? Well, I'm just venting. I'm venting about my wife's cooking. No. You're complaining. Okay? There's a difference. You can vent in your prayer with the Lord. I'm sure Jesus vented in his prayers to the Lord. I'm sure he'd had to hang out with us as human beings for a long time. And yeah, there's a lot of goodness in us, but we're kind of silly folk at times. So I'm sure he vented. This is to sometimes our venting is helpful for us, but sometimes when we vent, it clouds the view of another person. So if I'm only ever saying bad things about my children to you, you're going to think they're bad people. If I'm only ever saying bad things to you about our worship team, the rest of our pastoral staff, our board, our seniors, our young adults, our little ones, our older ones, if I'm only ever saying that, you're going to start to adopt that mindset. Be like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, they are all crabby. We got to cut them off. No. Sometimes we've vented to the wrong space. And so when we've done that, we need to go and say sorry, because we got to change the narrative. We got to change the culture we've created. We've got to change the language. We got to follow up and say, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. My friend Curtis from Central Alberta, he and I would routinely do this for one another. Sometimes we'd go out for nachos and we'd be slamming back these nachos, and then our conversation would take a turn. Instead of focused on healthy things, maybe we'd start to grumble and complain about work, about people we knew, about people we didn't like. And oftentimes, after you get back home and you sit and you reflect, you're like, oh my goodness, I actually shouldn't have said that. So I got to pick up the phone and I got to call my buddy Curtis and say, dude, I am so sorry. Forgive me. I've asked for forgiveness from the Lord. I know that's there, but forgive me because I don't want your opinion to be tainted. I want the truth to be revealed over time. So that's going to be the challenge. Now, if you're the recipient of one of those things, the worst case that you can do when somebody's coming to apologize to you for something, is give them a list of other things that they need to apologize to you for, okay? That's not helpful. That's not helpful. You simply say, I hear what you're saying, I receive your apology. Maybe you can't extend forgiveness in the moment, but you can at least hear what they're saying and receive their apology. And start building that bridge towards wholeness and restoration and forgiveness. So that's the second challenge. First challenge, people you envy. Second challenge, people that you've complained to about something that's been unhealthy. Then ask the Lord for forgiveness. The third thing is this: generate a list of things or people that you've complained about. Maybe this will be your longest list. I don't know. And then I want you to take it to the Lord and ask Him for wisdom. I could write you a prescription and say, do this, but then you might only do it because I told you to do it. That's not going to be helpful. That's called hypocrisy. Doing the right thing for the wrong motivation. That's hypocrisy. So we don't want to do that. But we want to be fully aware, because God is already fully aware of what we have been doing, are doing, and will do in the future. So we want to be self-aware in that moment and say, you know what? Here are the things that I've been envious about. Here are the people I've been envious about. Here's the stuff I've been gossiping about. What do I do with it? And maybe He's going to give you an opportunity, an invitation to work that out with that individual. And maybe He won't. But He knows better than I do. So why not ask Him instead of me? So over these next few moments, our worship team is going to lead us in a song. It's called Trust in God. I want you to pull out your phone. I want you to start making these lists. If you prefer paper, good news, we've got paper for you. Up here on my right and my left, we got 2 stations filled with fun little golf pencils and cards with these 3 challenges. I invite you to pick one up and start filling it out. Not because I told you so, but because here's what I think. Fundamentally, every single one of us desires to see our lives flourish relationally. I'm telling you, if we're engaged in these habits, the relationships around us will suffer. So this only betters you, and it reflects who Jesus is. And maybe here today you're like, I don't even know who Jesus is. That's the place to start. If all this other stuff is overwhelming, you're like, I'm not even sure I know Jesus, start there. Start there and go like, okay, maybe this thing about Jesus, that's what I need to know about. That's what I need to learn about. And you could pray something simple like this: Jesus, I'm curious about who you are. I don't know everything, but I do know one thing, that there's something inside me missing. And I think that's you. And so I want to choose you today. I want to receive forgiveness in ways that I can't forgive myself. And I want to trust that you're going to work in my life. You can pray something like that, or whatever own words, own language that you have. And if you are praying something like that, or if you need help to pray about that stuff, I'm going to be right here. I'm going to be right here under that need prayer sign on what is the south wall of our congregation space. And you can find me there, and I'm there to talk to you. I'm there to pray with you. I'm there to listen, okay? Or you can nudge the person next to you that made you come today and be like, hey, you're up. I need help. You're it. So during this song, I want us to engage in this experience with one another. Because if we want to grow, if we want to be the community that God intends us to be, we have to refrain from digesting one another. We have to refrain from being envious of one another. Instead, look to King Jesus in all ways, all shapes, all forms. The last thing I'll say is this. Throughout this series, what we're going to be doing is hoping to record special podcast episodes that give you a little bit more as to digest and work through. And maybe as I've been chatting and yakking, some questions have surfaced in your heart and mind. You can always send a text or an email to jason@croad.ca. And what we're hoping to do is, if you get those to me by Tuesday of this week, on Wednesday, myself and probably a collection of 2 or 3 other people will sit down and record a podcast talking about maybe some of the things that we can do to continue to flesh this out in our own lives. And then on Thursday of this week, that podcast will go live. And then when you're cutting the grass or you're doing dishes or whatever other house chore is your responsibility, you can pop that on and have a listen and walk into that space so that we can be better together. We can love one another in the way that Jesus first loved us. Let me pray. Father, thank you for this opportunity that we have to learn from your word, the invitation that we have to reflect your character in all ways at all times. Father, would you forgive me? Would you forgive us when we fall short? Where instead of being advocates of hope for one another, we are advocates of destruction. If there's anyone here today who's been harmed and wounded by words from people who've said that they know you, that shared things with them that were less than anything outside of your character, Lord, would you heal that woundedness? And instead replace it with hope and truth. And over these next few moments, Holy Spirit, as we respond to your invitation to get rid of these habits in our lives, would today be a tipping point? Would it start something new inside us and around us? Not so that we could be honored and glorified, but so that you could be honored and glorified and take your rightful place in our community and in our surrounding area. Because as we love one another, we reflect who you are to a world that's desperately in need of hope. And we don't want to kill hope, Lord. We want to fan it into flame. Would you bless us and protect us? Would you make your face shine upon us, be gracious to us? Would you grant us your favor and your peace? I pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.